Picture this, a backyard barbecue, string lights, everyone a little buzzed on cheap wine. A guy named Mark is talking to a woman he just met an hour ago. She's laughing at everything he says, touching his arm, telling him he's so easy to talk to, unlike everyone else here. By the end of the night, he's given her his number, invited her to his business launch, maybe even hinted at a loan. 3 weeks later, she's gone. So is $2,000. So is the launch. Everyone at that party is shocked. Everyone except one guy standing by the cooler the whole night, sipping a beer, saying almost nothing. He watched her work the room. He watched her recalibrate her personality for every single person she talked to. Sweet with the men, competitive with the women, reverent with anyone who mentioned money. He said nothing because there was nothing to say yet. He just watched. And when Mark comes to him 3 weeks later, devastated, asking, "How did you know?" the guy doesn't gloat. He just says, "I didn't know. I just don't hand out trust like it's free samples." Hold that thought. Because what you just witnessed is the difference between the people who get destroyed by this world and the one person in the room who doesn't easily. And by the end of this video, you're going to understand why that guy by the cooler isn't cold, isn't broken, isn't incapable of love. He's the most dangerously sanest person in the building. Here's the thesis, and I want to say it early because I don't want you to miss it. Distrust, real, disciplined, earned distrust, is not a character flaw. It is not cynicism, it is not damage. It is a form of intelligence that this culture has spent decades trying to shame out of you. We've been taught that trust is the default setting, that suspicion is the disease and openness is the cure, that the good, healthy, evolved person walks into every room assuming the best in everybody. And I'm here to tell you that is one of the most dangerous lies you've ever been sold, because the man who verifies before he trusts, who watches before he opens up, who treats charm as a data point instead of a green light, that man doesn't get easily destroyed. He doesn't get used. He doesn't get blindsided at 2 a.m. by a betrayal he never saw coming, because he was always seeing it coming. He's not naive. He's not paranoid either. He's awake. And there's a very specific reason the world doesn't want you to wake up. Let's talk about the lie, because you've heard it your whole life dressed up in 100 different outfits. Give people the benefit of the doubt. Everyone deserves a chance. Don't judge a book by its cover. Vulnerability is strength. Assume good intent. It sounds beautiful. It sounds like the kind of thing a wise grandmother says on a greeting card. But ask yourself who actually benefits when you walk through life, handing out trust like it's confetti at a parade. Not you. Never you. The people who benefit from your default trust are the ones who have learned to exploit it. The manipulator who needs you to let your guard down before the first ask. The friend who needs you distracted while they position themselves for your job. The partner who needs you to ignore the fourth red flag because everyone deserves a chance. Here's the brutal truth nobody wants to say out loud. Trust everyone is not advice for your benefit. It's advice that keeps the system running smoothly for the people who prey on trust. A world full of instinctively trusting people is a world that is very, very easy to manipulate. And a world that's easy to manipulate is exactly the world certain people want you living in. If you are still liking this far, there are 100+ more content out there which didn't survive here because these were too good to share publicly. You will find those forbidden video links below. The mirror nobody wants to look into is this. Most people don't actually believe trust everyone either. They just apply it selectively, unconsciously to whoever flatters them the fastest. That's not wisdom. That's a nervous system responding to dopamine. The man who trusts no one blindly isn't rejecting connection. He's rejecting the shortcut. He's saying, prove it, don't perform it. Now let me bring in a man who understood this before most of us were even capable of understanding ourselves. Friedrich Nietzsche. Nietzsche spent a huge amount of his writing dismantling what he called herd morality. The comfortable, crowd-approved values most people absorb without ever questioning them. And one of the herd's favorite values is blind trust, because blind trust keeps the herd docile, predictable, easy to lead. Nietzsche believed the strong individual, what he called the free spirit, earns their convictions through suspicion, through testing, through refusing to accept anything just because everybody else accepts it. He essentially argued that the people who question everyone's motives, who refuse comfortable illusions about human nature, aren't bitter. They're the only ones actually seeing clearly. Nietzsche also spent years being betrayed by people close to him, including friends he trusted deeply. And it shaped one of his sharpest insights, that the people who wound you the worst are almost never strangers. They're the ones who got close enough to know exactly where to aim. Distance isn't paranoia. Distance is just math. And then there's Niccolò Machiavelli, a man history has spent 500 years slandering as a cynic, when really he was just one of the first people willing to describe human behavior as it actually is, instead of how we wish it were. Machiavelli's core insight, stripped of the villain reputation, was simple. People act in their own self-interest far more often than they admit, even to themselves, and the person who assumes otherwise is not virtuous, he's exposed. He wasn't telling princes to be cruel for fun. He was telling them to stop being shocked every single time someone betrayed them for advantage, because betrayal for advantage is not an anomaly of human nature. It's a baseline. Understand that baseline, Machiavelli argued, and you stop being ambushed by it. Both of these men, centuries apart, arrived at the same dangerous conclusion. The person who studies human nature honestly, without the rose-colored filter, ends up looking suspicious to everyone still wearing the filter. That's not because he's darker than them, it's because he's more awake than them. Now let's get into the psychology of what's actually happening inside the mind of someone who trusts no one blindly. Because this is where it gets specific, and this is where you're going to start recognizing yourself. First, he's learned to separate charm from character. Most people confuse the two completely. Someone is warm, funny, complimentary, and the brain files them under safe within about 90 seconds. The distrustful man knows charm is a skill, not a virtue. He's met plenty of warm people who would sell him out for a promotion and plenty of awkward, blunt people who would take a bullet for him. So he stops using charisma as his filter and starts using something slower. Consistency over time, especially when nobody's watching. Second, he's noticed the tell that almost nobody else notices, the gap between what people say about themselves and how they actually treat waiters, exes, and people who can't do anything for them. "I'm such a loyal friend," someone says, right before trashing a friend who isn't in the room. "You can always count on me," someone says 2 days before flaking without an explanation. He's stopped listening to the trailer. He watches the movie. Third, he's developed something almost uncomfortable to describe, a kind of delay, where other people feel an emotional pull towards someone and immediately act on it. He feels the pull and just waits. He lets the first impression age like wine, instead of drinking it on the spot. Fourth, and this is the one that gets him labeled cold, he's stopped needing to be liked by everyone in the room. Because needing to be liked is exactly the lever manipulators pull. If you need everyone's approval, all a bad actor has to do is offer you approval first, and you'll hand them trust to keep it coming. He's disconnected the wire. No approval needed, no lever to pull. Here's a small granular moment you'll recognize. Someone at work says, "just between us," before telling you something about a mutual co-worker. That phrase, "just between us," should be one of the loudest alarms in the English language, because it tells you two things at once. This person gossips, and this person will one day say "just between us" about you to somebody else. The trusting person hears "just between us" and feels flattered, chosen, special. The distrustful man hears "just between us" and quietly notes, "this is not a vault, this is a leak. I am simply not being leaked on today." For this one, somebody does you a favor you didn't ask for, then brings it up 3 separate times over the following month. "Remember when I helped you move that couch?" That's not generosity. That's an invoice with a delayed due date. The naive person keeps saying, "Yeah, thank you so much," genuinely grateful, not realizing a debt is being built. The awake man clocks it the second time it's mentioned and adjusts accordingly. Not with cruelty, just with clarity. Watch how fast someone tells you their trauma. Not whether they share it. Sharing pain is human and it can be the beginning of something real. What he's watching is the timing and the delivery. The person who unloads a full tragic backstory 40 minutes into meeting you, polished, rehearsed, hitting the same emotional beats every single time they tell it, isn't necessarily lying about the events. But he's noticed that a story this smooth has been told before, to someone before, for a reason before, and he quietly wonders what that reason was and whether he's about to become the next audience for it. Real vulnerability is usually clumsy. It stumbles, it backtracks. It doesn't land its punchlines. When it lands too well too early, That's not intimacy being offered. That's a script being tested for effectiveness. Notice the compliment that arrives right before the ask. You're honestly one of the smartest people I know, which is why I wanted to run something by you. He's not rejecting the compliment. He's just filing it under context, because he's watched this exact sentence structure precede a pyramid scheme pitch, a request for a loan, and an attempt to get him to co-sign something he had no business co-signing. The compliment isn't fake, necessarily. It's just never ever free, and he's stopped pretending it is. Now let's talk about why this terrifies certain people. Because it does, and it breaks down into clear categories. Economically, a person who verifies before he invests, before he partners, before he co-signs, is a terrible target for scams, pyramid schemes, and, trust me bro, business deals. The entire predatory economy, from get-rich-quick schemes to high-pressure sales, runs on people who trust too fast. Politically, movements, propaganda, and manufactured outrage all depend on an audience that accepts a narrative because it's repeated confidently and often, not because it's been verified. The habitually suspicious mind asks, says, who and why are they telling me this, before it reacts, which makes it a genuinely bad audience for manipulation at scale. Psychologically, and this is the one that stings the people around him most, his refusal to trust blindly is a mirror. It reminds every person who does hand out trust freely, who has been burned repeatedly and keeps doing it anyway, exactly how exposed they actually are. His caution isn't an insult to them, but it feels like one, because it's evidence they could have protected themselves and didn't. Here's the brutal truth about why he gets called paranoid instead of praised for being right. Nobody wants to be the naive one in the story, so when he turns out to be correct about somebody, when the charming co-worker really was stealing credit, when the new friend really was love-bombing before an ask, people don't say, wow, you were right to be careful. They say you're too suspicious of everyone. Because admitting he was right means admitting they were the one who got played. History doesn't exactly hide the lesson here. Either it just gets told as tragedy instead of instruction. Julius Caesar didn't die because he lacked power. He died because the last face he saw was one he'd elevated, trusted, protected, and never once seriously entertained the possibility of betrayal from. Every empire that's ever collapsed from the inside collapsed the same way. Not because the enemy at the gate was too strong, but because someone on the inside was trusted, past the point the evidence supported. Strip away the togas and the historical distance, and it's the same pattern that plays out at the office. In the friend group, in the family, proximity gets mistaken for loyalty, and the mistake gets made by people who were smart in every other area of their life. Intelligence doesn't inoculate you against this, only the habit of checking does. Let's get into the pillars, because there are 4 traits that make this kind of alertness dangerous in the best possible sense. 1. Evidence over impression. The dangerous man doesn't decide who someone is based on a first conversation, a compliment, or a shared sense of humor. He decides based on a pattern, observed across time, especially under pressure, especially when there's nothing in it for the other person. This makes him nearly impossible to con, because every con depends on skipping this step. 2. Silence as a weapon of clarity. He doesn't announce his suspicions. He doesn't confront people with, I don't trust you yet. He simply watches quietly without tipping his hand, which means manipulators never know they've been read until it's far too late to adjust their performance for him specifically. 3. Boundaries before bonds. Most people build the friendship first and figure out boundaries later, usually after getting hurt. The dangerous man does it backwards on purpose. Boundaries first, established early, calmly, non-negotiably, and lets the relationship build on top of that foundation instead of around it. 4. Refusal to reward performance. Compliments, favors, flattery, and grand gestures don't move him the way they move everyone else, because he's learned that the people most generous with performance are often the ones with the least substance behind it. He's not immune to kindness. He's just immune to kindness used as a transaction. Notice what these 4 pillars are not. They're not aggression. They're not hostility. They're not walking into a room assuming everyone's a threat. That version, the loud defensive everyone's out to get me version, isn't discernment. It's fear wearing discernment's clothes, and it burns people out fast because it costs enormous energy to maintain. The real thing is quieter than that. It looks almost passive from the outside. It looks like a man who just doesn't seem to need much from anyone, who's pleasant, easy to be around, and somehow never quite gives you the leverage you were expecting to have over him by week 2. Now let's not pretend this is easy, because it isn't, and pretending otherwise would make this whole video a lie. There's a real price for living this way. People will call him paranoid, hard to get close to, and some of that criticism will actually land, because discernment taken too far curdles into isolation, and that's a real risk, not a myth. He'll miss out on some genuinely good people, simply because good people sometimes look identical to bad ones in month 1. And being wrong about someone in the cautious direction still costs him something. A friendship that could have started sooner. An opportunity he hesitated on. He'll spend energy other people don't spend. And that's exhausting in a way most trusting people never have to experience. And there will be a specific kind of loneliness in being the only person at the party who saw it coming. Because foresight without someone to share it with just sits in your chest like a stone. That's the real cost. Not weakness. Vigilance has a price, and anyone selling you a version of this where the alert man pays nothing is lying to you. But here's the paradox, and it's the part that changes everything once you actually understand it. The man who trusts almost no one ends up trusted more deeply, by far fewer people, than the man who trusts everyone, because when he finally does extend real trust, it isn't cheap. It isn't given to anyone who simply showed up and said the right words. It was earned across months, sometimes years, through consistency. The other person didn't even know was being tested. So when he says, "I trust you," it carries actual weight. And the people on the receiving end of that trust know it. Meanwhile, the person who trusts everyone gets betrayed constantly, precisely because trust that costs nothing to receive gets treated as though it's worth nothing to keep. The paradox is this: the man who is hardest to betray is also eventually the man with the deepest, safest relationships in the room. Selective trust doesn't produce fewer real connections. It produces almost no fake ones. So here's the call back to that guy standing by the cooler. He wasn't cold that night. He wasn't judging Mark, and he wasn't smug about being right 3 weeks later. He was simply paying attention in a room full of people who had outsourced their attention to good vibes and free wine. That's the whole difference. Not intelligence in the traditional sense, not superiority, just the refusal to let a warm feeling substitute for actual evidence. So here's my challenge to you. Stop apologizing for the pause before you trust someone. Stop letting people guilt you into just giving them a chance before they've shown you who they are. Watch the pattern, not the performance. Let time do the talking instead of charisma. Become the person who is very, very hard to blindside. Because history is not short on brilliant, kind, capable people who trusted the wrong smile at the wrong moment and paid for it for years. Become the person who isn't on that list. If this made you think about someone you gave trust to way too fast, do others a favor and share it with someone who needs to hear it. You know exactly who they are. And drop a comment telling me this. One red flag you explained away, that you can see clearly now looking back. We want to hear it. And remember, in a world that keeps telling you to trust first and ask questions later, the sanest thing you can possibly do is ask the questions first. Stay sharp, stay dangerous, and I'll see you in the next one, my friends.